Coming up this hour, is the Indiana religious freedom law really about a right to discriminate? We'll talk it over with Mike Farris, who's co-author of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Join us next for the Janet Mefferd Show.
The Janet Mefferd Show.
The great thing about the Bible is it never evolves.
What's immoral about getting married? Gay, straight, everybody wants that.
Don't discard the time-tested values upon which civilization was built simply because they're old.
There are many paths to what you call God.
It's so simple. Maybe you need a refresher course.
Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me.
If the Word of God says it, I believe it.
That's the way it is. And now, here is Janet Mefferd.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. The left predictably came out in droves over the last several days to protest Indiana's religious freedom legislation, which is also similarly enacted both in 19 other states and on the federal level through RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And yet the left is furious that this legislation is nothing more than codifying a so-called right to discriminate. That's what they like to say. But if that is true, where does that leave the First Amendment and the individual rights of those Christian business owners who were seen all over the place having their freedoms violated? Well, we're going to talk about it all now with Mike Farris. He is co-author of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and chancellor at Patrick Henry College, also chairman of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And it is so great to talk to you again. Mike, how are you?
I'm great to be with you again, Janet.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you were very heavily involved with RFRA at the time. And it's interesting, isn't it, to see at this stage in the game, all of a sudden Indiana has just committed the unforgivable sin.
Yeah, I don't know where all these people were. In fact, I know where they were. They were in the room with me helping to pass RFRA when we did this. The Democrats controlled both houses of Congress. It passed unanimously by a voice vote in the House of Representatives and 97-3 in the U.S. Senate. And I was in the Rose Garden when Bill Clinton was president when he signed it into law. The ACLU was on our side. People for the American Way were on our side. All these groups were on our side because we had this agreement. Religious freedom is for everybody. It doesn't matter what religion you believe. It doesn't matter how unpopular it is with the people of that day. And all of a sudden, those agreements are gone, and religious freedom itself is at stake right now.
What would you say is the fundamental reason they went from backing RFRA back then to now saying that's just horrendous?
Well, it's because whose ox is being gored. The case that brought the whole thing to a head was a case involving Native Americans who took the drug peyote as a part of a religious ceremony, and there were other issues involving the Hmongs from Vietnam who had a belief that if they're relatives who were murdered or killed or something had an autopsy, their souls would go to the netherworld rather than to paradise. And so the religions that were being discussed right there didn't bother the left. But the religions that are being discussed today do bother the left. They don't like the fact that Christians believe that homosexuality is sin. And this isn't about discrimination. This is about forcing Christians to participate in same-sex ceremonies, whether they want to or not.
Exactly. So when you go back to 1993, when RFRA went through, why was that necessary? A lot on the left who didn't really pay attention at the time are saying we have a First Amendment. Why do we need all this extra legislation on the federal level and on the state level?
Well, it's because Justice Scalia and the majority of the Supreme Court, in the case called Employment Division versus Smith, threw the free exercise of religion into the constitutional trash can. And we were trying to reverse the Supreme Court, which we did. Now, in a later case called Bernie versus Flores, the Supreme Court said that Congress could pass the Religious Freedom Restoration Act for the states, to bind the federal government, to prevent the federal government from committing violations of religious freedom, but the states had to pass their own. It was a federalism-based decision. So a whole group of states quite quickly passed state versions of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And it was because we're trying to fix the Supreme Court anomaly. And so, I mean, the cases that I was concerned with at the time were like homeschoolers, or a case that I sat in the courtroom where John Whitehead litigated this case in the 70s when a Orthodox Presbyterian church was being sued under the city's gay rights law because they had a church minister of music who they found out was a homosexual, and he wouldn't repent, and so they fired him. And so the question was, could they use the San Francisco local ordinance to coerce the church to hire a homosexual minister? And so the answer under the case from the Supreme Court would have been, yeah, you can force the church to hire the minister. And so in order to stop those kinds of cases, we passed RFRA.
Yes, exactly. I remember that case too. So now we have the situation in Indiana. Why Indiana? I mean, when you've had all these other states that have already passed similar legislation, what do you think it is about Indiana that all of a sudden is making the top blow off the heads of the Seattle mayor and the others?
Well, it's just, it's a crime of convenience. Indiana happens to be the one passing it right now, and they want to take a pot shot at Mike Pence because he might run for president, and they want to take, they want to make sure that all the Republican presidential candidates get in line with the homosexual agenda. And so, I mean, my advice to Mike Pence, who's my friend, is this: stand strong on this, and you will be the front runner. All of us, in 48 hours, you'll be the front runner for the presidential nomination, because people are looking for a courageous leader who will stand up in the onslaught from the left. And if Mike Pence stands strong, he can continue to say, this isn't about discrimination, this is about religious freedom, and we're going to stand on our law. If they back off the law, Mike will lose a lot of ground in the Republican primary.
I think you're really onto something there. I want to talk about it more, but we do have to go to a very quick break. Coming back with Mike Farris talking about Indiana and religious freedom when we return. Stay with us. The hour on the Janet Mefferd Show. I'm talking with Mike Farris, Chancellor at Patrick Henry College, Chairman of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and also the co-author of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is very much in the news right now due to what is going on in Indiana. And, Mike, you were talking about Mike Pence, the governor of Indiana right now, who I think the world of. I think he would be a fabulous president. And it's interesting, as you were saying, he should really hold firm. He seems to be thus far.
Yeah, so far he is. He's earning all kinds of brownie points with a lot of people. Courage points with a lot of people. First of all, he did the right thing under a little bit of a charged atmosphere when he signed it, but it is a far more dramatically charged atmosphere right now. And for him to stand firm right now, I think is really good. I mean, I've known Mike for a long time. He is a wonderful man, but he's going to make or break his own future here in the next week.
Yeah, he's wonderful. Now, let's talk a little bit about what the left is charging over this religious freedom legislation, because they're saying, generally speaking, what Indiana has done is it's given people the right to discriminate. We're squarely back in the Jim Crow era, according to, I believe, the Apple CEO. What do you say to that?
I think it's a bunch of nonsense. The law says nothing about the ability to discriminate. It is only a question of where the law of Indiana affirmatively forces someone to act against their own religious conscience. The law gives them relief unless the government can prove that there's a really important governmental reason to not honor religious freedom in this particular circumstance. It has almost, the number of times it would apply in a homosexual context is going to be 1% or less of the occasions. It's mostly going to be about other issues dealing directly with the government, where the government tries to coerce homeschoolers, where the government tries to coerce a Christian school to do something, where the government tries to coerce a church to do something. That's where it's going to be applied 99% of the time. Now, an individual business owner, if they were being coerced personally to participate in activity, if they, if a doctor was coerced to perform an abortion, it's not saying that other women can't go get abortions, but if a doctor by Indiana law was saying you will lose your medical license if you don't do abortions, this law would protect them. if a doctor was being told you've got to do artificial insemination on a lesbian couple, there's a homosexual potential application. But it would be for anybody. A doctor could say, I'm not going to do artificial insemination for a non-married couple. That violates my religious beliefs. I think children should be raised in a marriage. And so, it's going to depend on the religious conviction and government coercion. And so this is a defense to government coercion, and that's all that it is.
Well, one of the things, Mike, that I noticed, and I'm sure you probably did too, is how many headlines are out there right now that in referring to the Indiana law put religious liberty in quotes. I'm looking at one right now. I think this is from CNN. Debate on Indiana, quote, religious freedom, unquote, bill explodes. As if that isn't really what it's about, is religious freedom, but it is.
It is, exactly. And what we have to decide in this country is in the cases where there is a conflict between homosexual rights and religious freedom, which is going to prevail. So let's take the photographer example. That's a real example. Now, will the same-sex couple not be able to get somebody to take the photographs for their wedding? Absolutely not.
No.
They get any number of people to do that for them. Would the person who's forced to do it be required to violate their conscience? Yes. So where does the government impact have the most impact on personal lives? And the answer is forcing the photographer to do something that violates his conscience. Right. And so, but in some level, we have to decide which we favor more. Do we favor religious freedom more, or do we favor homosexual rights more? And the same thing can be said about other things. Do we favor religious freedom more or abortion rights more in the case where are we going to require a doctor, a pro-life doctor, to engage in abortions? That puts the question, which do we value more? And the people who want to value all these leftist agendas more than religious freedom forget why this country was founded in the first place. And I contend that the number of occasions that somebody should be able to coerce anybody, whether they're Jewish or Buddhist or Baptist or Hmongs from Vietnam, it shouldn't matter. Religious freedom should prevail in this country because that's the essence of what it means to be an American.
Exactly right. And there was an example brought up in the media today. I think Hot Air had reported on this, where what would you do if a Jewish bakery was told you have to make a Hitler cake? And that actually has occurred. I don't know if it was a Jewish bakery, but they showed a picture of a Hitler cake. That would be a perfect example, but I don't really think it's about religion per se, and maybe you can weigh in on this. I think it's about validating homosexuality as equal to heterosexuality without moral judgment. I think that's what's really driving this.
I agree with you completely, Jan. I think what it is that they will not rest until everybody in this country bows the knee to the claim that we are doing nothing wrong, and I think they're trying to assuage their guilty consciences.
Yeah.
I met Justice White in the Dulles airport shortly after he wrote the decision of Bowers versus Hardwick, which upheld the right of states to enact laws relative to homosexual behavior. And I went up to him. I'd written an amicus brief in the case, and I went to him and told him how much I appreciated his decision, and he grumbled that, I guess I'm the only person in America who thinks that way, or something like that. And I told him, no, there are millions of people stand with you. And his wife turned to me and said, thank you so much for sharing that. Oh. And what was going on was obvious to me is he was getting the tar beat out of him in social circles about saying that the states can stand against homosexual rights campaigns. And so it's been a steady drumbeat from that day until this. And anybody that says homosexuality is a sin, they're going to have their right to speak against that curtailed. This is about free speech ultimately. Can people be coerced to bow the knee to homosexual equality when we just believe that it's contrary to the moral code of God?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things the Atlantic has pointed out, they say that the Indiana statute has two features that federal RFRA and most of the state RFRAs don't have. One they mention is the fact that Indiana allows for-profit businesses to assert their rights to the free exercise of religion. This is something that they complained about with the Hobby Lobby case as well. But how did the Hobby Lobby case impact this statute, if at all?
Well, it only showed the need for clarity. RFRA did apply, and the Supreme Court held that it applied. The federal RFRA applied to for-profit businesses, and there isn't any reason they should. When I was testifying in favor of RFRA in Congress when it was originally passed, I mentioned my parents' Christian bookstore, and I gave the example. Can the state of Washington coerce my parents' Christian bookstore to hire a Muslim or an atheist to be a clerk in their Christian bookstore?
Yeah.
my parents owned a for-profit Christian bookstore, and the answer, of course, was we're trying to protect businesses like that in those kind of rare circumstances. But the guy who owns a gas station, he doesn't care. The grocery store, he doesn't care. It's these personal services and these unique businesses where people do care, and for good reason. Whether or not they're going to be forced to, the doctors that are going to be forced to do abortions, the photographers that are going to be forced to take photographs of same-sex weddings, and so on. That's where the Religious Freedom Restoration Act will be involved, and not in the general run-of-the-mill cases.
Yeah, and I think where this kind of falls apart with their standard narrative about, religious liberty and gay rights, I think when people point out things like, well, what about the halal butchers, and should they be forced to make, pork chops, or should the kosher delis have to make ham sandwiches, or should the Jewish bakery have to make Hitler cakes? They laugh at that stuff, and they say, oh, come on, nobody would want that, and that's not what we're talking about, which really goes back to making our point on the issue of homosexuality and gay rights. As Kai Feldblum said, gay rights and religious rights can't coexist. Gay rights has to trump. Where is this all headed, Mike? That's what I think a lot of Christians are concerned about. Are we going to prevail with the First Amendment?
Well, the First Amendment's already been trashed thanks to Justice Scalia and company. And the question is whether we're going to prevail through the Religious Freedom Restoration Acts. And so there are law review articles out there today from professors at Emory, from George Washington University, and from Northwestern University that call for banning all private schools and all home schools because we teach our children that Jesus is the only way to God, and they want to stop that kind of intolerance. And so where this is going to end is they're going to seek to enforce those. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. I can cite you the law review articles where they say this. And what you read in the law reviews today is a precursor of what's going to happen 20 years from now. And if you read the law review articles 20 years ago about same-sex issues, you could predict exactly what's happening today. And in fact, I did predict it many times. And I was unsuccessful in getting a federal marriage amendment through, which I tried to achieve, along with many other people. But nonetheless, that's where we're headed. We're headed into banning the teaching of Christianity. You see it in England right now where a pastor was condemned by a judge for using biblical references that point out that homosexuality is a sin.
Yes.
That's where we're headed.
Yes. And this is the guy you can quote Leviticus 18, but not Leviticus 20, that guy.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Exactly right.
Unbelievable. So ultimately, we come back to this question, this fundamental cornerstone of American society, which is religious liberty. And we have a generation in front of us, many of whom do not value it, think that it is bigoted, think that it is something that has been abused. How do we make the case again for religious liberty, and why, without religious liberty, in many respects, we cease to be America?
Well, I think just getting the truth out is really helpful. I mean, people are getting their heads cleared. It's kind of like in the Chronicles of Narnia where Puddleglum was being enticed by this concoction, and he stomps on the fire. And then C.S. Lewis says there's nothing like the smell of burnt marshwiggle to bring people to their senses. I think it's time for some of us marshwiggles to stand up and take the heat and do what's right and tell people, look, this is the real conflict. It's not about discriminating in the normal kind of way we think about discrimination. This is about coercing people to participate in something that their religion tells them they can't do. Right. Do we want to do that? It's not whether or not the homosexuals can get married. We're past that point. This is the question. Can you force a Christian church, a Christian pastor, a Christian photographer, a Christian baker to participate in that ceremony against their will? That's the issue at stake today. And most people in America would answer that question appropriately if they just get the information and get it framed up correctly.
Absolutely. And I've seen polls to that effect as well. And the big part that isn't mentioned a lot of times on the other side is the fact that with these florists, with these photographers, it isn't that they refused all service to homosexual couples. It was they didn't want to materially participate in a so-called same-sex wedding ceremony itself. And that's left out. They just say, we're not going to discriminate. You guys discriminate against homosexuals. That's not even telling the truth.
Exactly. Well, lies and deception are at the heart of the tactics on the other side in so many ways. And, why would we expect them to do anything differently about this? That's why programs like yours are so important about getting out the truth.
Well, thank you, Mike, and I really appreciate all the things that you have done and everybody, your organization, have done over the years to, do all these things to keep us free. We certainly appreciate what God has done to use you, Mike Farris. Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate everything that you do. Thanks again, Mike.
Thanks, Janet.
All right, you take care. We're going to come back on the Janet Mefferd Show after this break. Don't go away.